So some disclaimers. I'm not a big company, but I just want to let you know all the limitations of what I'm going to present. So this is work in progress. If you see any companies missing, just let me know. This really is highly limited analysis by who and what I know. Also, this is a rapidly shifting landscape. In my welcome, you saw all the transactions that have happened over just this year. And also, key is, when I get the weblog out, and I will, I promise, next month, I guarantee that it's going to be out of date. Also, it is an attempt to map out the companies and technologies across CX tech. So that's CPaaS, CCaaS, UCaaS, business messaging, in-app communications, and enablers, enterprise messaging, collaboration, and all the automation technology. So in scope, it's massive. I focused on, and I'll share with you where I focused initially. And there is a massive associated Excel sheet. And again, in the weblog, when I do it, I'll share some of that as well. Well, I wanted to give you a little bit of background as to why I was motivated to do this. And the key is, in any industry, the question you always got to ask is who pays the analysts? Now, this is an old analyst word, cloud, but the key is it's the big companies. They pay the analysts. The analysts fill the industry with noise. And as you saw and heard in the in my welcome address, I'm not going to go through this again. There's a lot of BS out there for a whole variety of reasons. But what that does for most of the players in this room is creates a bit of an unlevel playing field, because you've got basically sort of customers' minds, the jabber, filled with stuff that's not quite right, that's not quite true. So what I'm trying to do is, in any situation where you've got an unlevel playing field, it's all about using numbers. So a meme, hey, it's a modern presentation. So let me just share with you. Here's a landscape I've shared before, and the green ones are where I'm focusing for this presentation. I've got, I'm building up the other ones, but for the time being, I've just focused in on these because I felt that it needed a bottom-up build. So what that is I just get a list of all the companies in that particular segment that I think should be in that segment. And then I either, from public available sources or just from guesstimates, look at what I think the revenue is and how that breaks down across the different segments and what I think the growth is going to be. And normally the feedback I get is, oh, that's quite accurate, Alan. How do you know that? It's a guess. But your growth's off by a factor of 2. Yeah, reality. So what you'll see is quite often the growth is where people have most concerns, but all I can say is it's just the way life is. So that's the background, that's the approach. Starting from the bottom, because this whole industry is built on open source. If there's one thing to take out of TAD Summit this year, is all the people sharing all the different IT and telecom projects that they're using for the deployment of their platforms. I showed the bottom here, a whole range of projects across Asterix, OpenSits, Elio, FreeSwitch, Rescom, WebRTC, and of course, the projects that then sit on top of them in terms of enablers. So we've heard from Wezo several times. So I think people now have got a pretty good idea on Wezo, where it's going, how it's trying to stitch together all these disparate open source projects. And that's one of the things that when I was at Astricom, what surprised me in talking to quite a few of the people who use Asterix, how unaware they are of all the other different projects and how they can be used together. So again, that's one of the strengths that I think that Wezo is bringing to this. But there's also, as always, a lot of other players who built stuff themselves. At TAD Summit Asia, also at TAD Summit Americas, Senate Mobile was presenting on their eCPaaS, their enterprise CPaaS. So this is, as CPaaS sort of becomes better understood, enterprises start to get their head around it. It's why do I need to rent when I can basically buy and deploy on-prem. So that's, again, really interesting evolution we're seeing in the market. This is just for people as they read through the presentation, not for you, but it just gives my very simple view on what each of the projects are. Again, if you think I'm completely wrong as you look through that, let me know. I'll happily discuss and change. And now here's the public CPaaS. So these are those who identify as CPaaS and do more than SMS. There's a lot of basically SMS providers that claim they're CPaaS when really it's more on the business messaging side. So I've got a whole list there. What I've done is I've got a big table where I put the list down. I gave, where it's publicly available. I've got the 2018 revenues, then where I think the growth is going to be over the next 4 years. I break it down across what are they getting from SIP trunking, core API, aggregation services, business messaging, 2FA, identity, IoT, CCaaS, UCaaS. Okay, so it's very broad and across most of the players. It's not complete, and where you see gaps. And if you do see a gap on the CPaaS, check the business messaging table first to make sure that I've not labeled that particular company as a messaging aggregator. And that gives us these curves. So it's bottom-up build, no fancy models. This is just the list of companies, guesstimating what their revenues are, and then building it out from that. And I provide, as you know, a lot of introductions between people. I've introduced to IDC analysts and to quite a few other analysts, CPaaS companies who they weren't aware of, yet they're producing overall market figures. So, how you can produce an overall market figure without understanding some of the key players in it, I don't know. But just to say that that's what I'm doing here. It's different. It's not some MBA, BS model. It's just very dumb. List of companies and where I think their revenue is at. So then I sort of break it down in terms of, the core API stuff, then the business messaging, CSAS, authentication, SIP trunking, all these sort of pieces I've got there. And then you got the total market size. And, IDC has an estimate of about 2 billion in 2017. We're a bit higher, but I'd say that's because I, have a lot more companies that I'm looking at. And then, they have 11 billion by 2022. And I'm looking at a little bit higher, again, just because I've got more companies. Plus, I'm including in the SIP trunking revenues, because they're just really looking at the voice and the messaging revenues. But when you see the numbers quoted and the growth, you've got to look at what's in the business portfolio. Because CPaaS, it's a made-up term, and it's important to sort of look at the different revenue components. Now, I also did, because it's fun, to take that model and then look at, well, what are telco CPaaS doing? Because telcos are doing stuff in this space. And as you can see, it's far smaller. You wouldn't really see it on the previous graph, but again, it shows that revenue is growing, maybe not significantly. And then what I looked at is, okay, so it's not big, but you've got a number of players in there that are doing CPaaS enablers. Then Mobile is one of them. Candy, Ribbon, or whatever they choose to rename themselves after buying ECI, is another. So, how much are these enablers getting out of supplying into this relatively small market? And looking at their revenues and adding them all up, you realize, wow, this is unusual for a telco. They're not making much money. It's almost like half of it is going to the enabler. So that I thought was quite an interesting one. That means that it's strategic. Most of the telcos that are doing something in this space are making an investment, making a punt, being seen to be doing something, not necessarily trying to build up a highly profitable business in the short term. So anyway, that was just to give you, some interesting pieces. I'm going to publish the numbers so you can slice and dice the data any way you want. Now, let's hop over onto business messaging, because this is a big market. These are the SMS-focused players, okay? So, you can say, well, Clickatel, it's a CPaaS. It calls itself a CPaaS. I go, well, most of the revenue is in messaging. So that's why you see that. ZipWhip, thanks to some of the dysfunctionalities in the US market. Smooch, another example, got bought by Zendesk. It was doing messaging aggregation. I mean, there's a whole range. Again, it's not complete, but it's got, hopefully, it's an 80-20 rule. I've got most of the guys there, but who are missing, just let me know. Same approach, guesstimating revenues and growth. And here you can see the breakdown in terms of the total market, which includes this aggregation, SMS aggregation piece, and then the piece that is just focused on business messaging. So this is all the marketing automation tools. So it's enabling you to basically send your message campaigns out to your customers. So again, just providing some basic numbers to help you understand CPaaS, business messaging. Because again, when you start digging in and looking at some of the analyst numbers, they don't really include business messaging in there. Or if they do, it then gets very complex. And are we really talking about aggregation? Are we talking about sort of all the value-added services that sit on top of that? So again, bottom-up build, nothing fancy. I then looked at the in-app comms. So a smaller number. So it's not a big, scary logo cloud. But again, this one has a lot of gray areas because you've got in-app marketing automation. So this is like Lean Plum, Iterable, and you've also got sort of your app development as well, because that includes sort of messaging and comms. So it can get a little difficult to identify. So they're the labels. The logos I chose. There's a few more I think in the table that I'll share. Again, just showing it's a growing market. Even though I showed in my welcome note that video got bought for 40 million on 60 million in revenue, it still, as an overall market, is growing. And of course, TalkBox was sort of bought by Telefonica, sold by Telefonica for the same price. So it is, it's a tough market. I don't deny it. But again, it is a market with growth. And then you saw this next slide from Lewis. And this is just, it's a scary side, just to show. And this is just employee communications. On one side is UC, business telephony phone systems. Guess what? Most of you salespeople, when they're going out, are using the word phone system because that's what people understand. You go UC, you what? And they're not even convinced they need UC. Markets like Asia, when you try to sell UCaaS, they go, well, my mobile phone, it has WhatsApp, it can take voice, it has all my team on here. Help me understand why that isn't a unified communication device. So again, you got to look market to market. But again, this is just to provide a breakdown of, because that's pretty full. I included the messaging and collaboration. The reason you've got this breakdown for employee communications is on the business phone systems, it tends to be a winner takes all. When you choose, Cisco, or you choose a particular vendor, it tends to be they've won the deal. While here on the messaging and collaboration, it varies from business group to business group. And we see that. You've got some groups use Microsoft Teams, some use Slack, and it's fine. It's not a problem. Those groups use the tools that are best fit. And don't forget, there's a whole host of embedded chat solutions in some of the project management tools as well. So it starts to get very complex, and I've not even included all the good old traditional conferencing players that are out there as well. Again, same bottom-up build, just list out all the companies. If it's listed, great. And even on some of the public companies like Cisco, they don't break out their UC revenues, so make a guess. And I guess in terms of growth, as you can see, there's some zeros or very low numbers in there with some of the big players. Also, I break down employees, the percentage that's as a service or hosted. Because some people claim to be cloud when it's not really cloud if it's running in a particular data center on your servers. But you can still call yourself UCaaS if you like. Also, the number of employees and stuff like that. And that gives these curves, doing that bottom-up build for enterprise voice UC. Now, I've got the total figure here. And of course, as soon as you look at that, it's like, well, wait a minute, that's wrong. It's supposed to be 33 billion in 2021. What are you showing, Alan? Oh, not even 15. Well, that's because I'm not including some big pieces of the market in this analysis. I'm looking at the guys that are sort of building the platforms, but there's channel, and they take a big margin. Telcos are, of course, a big piece of that as channel. And guess what? Here in Europe, there's also this mobile PBX. We might laugh, but Spain, it's the dominant PBX system in small, medium enterprises. In the Nordics, it's still a service that's available. And because it just works, people are paying their monthly fees. So there's a whole range of, as you dig in, you start to see all the other players that we need to include. So anyway, that's just so you understand why the figure is different. And yes, I need to include them so you get some congruence between the different numbers. But I also broke it down into, so how does that split between the big players, the Avayas, the Ciscos, the Microsofts, and then the smaller players? And arbitrary line, if you're more than a couple of 100 million a year, you're a big player. If you're less than that, you're a small player. So that's what makes up those two lines there. Now, what's interesting is growth is faster on the smaller players, but also what's really interesting is approximately 80% of those small players are built on open source telco software. So that's really interesting. We've got relatively young market. Average age of those companies in that small segment is about 6.5 years, and all built on open source. So this is a major achievement in creating some diversity in supply. And there's some other facts and figures. I'm not going to bore you because we've only got sort of 4 minutes left, and I want to make sure we got time for everybody else to speak. So that gives you a feel for some of the work that I've been doing. I'm going to get it published. In next steps, yes, get the weblog, flesh out the messaging and collaboration piece, because that's really interesting once we start to break that down. And it also needs to be sub-segmented because it is quite complex. But again, there's a ton of revenue and a lot of diversity in there. I need to revisit the UC phone system one to get better alignment with the analyst numbers, simply because I need to get the channel stuff in there, and then just keep publishing this stuff to help raise the knowledge for everybody in the industry. Back to that initial motivation in reducing the bullshit that we see out there in the market. The cloud is not necessarily the answer. Hybrid is perfectly valid, and there's a lot of customers that just want a phone system and have no inclination whatsoever to include any messaging around that. And then just wrapping up, that it's basically a work in progress. So with that, we got time for maybe one quick question, and then